Just when you maybe count him out, Jeff Capel wakes up and throws a punch in the positive direction, maybe a punch or two. This is mic'd up here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and we're keeping it with the mothership for this show here with Pittsburgh Sports Now, and in for good reason, because Jeff Capel's been doing work this offseason and maybe under the radar for the most part, but now lands his highest recruit he has had in his tenure at Pitt in Dior Johnson. I'm Mike Asti, that's Mike Vukovcan, and we are going to touch on what this means, the maybe surprise factor of how this happened, and then when you factor in Nelly Cummings and others, how this offseason has been for Jeff Capel and the outlook for this team, because as we touched on past shows, he needed to do work this offseason, and many feel his job is on the line, and anything outside of significant improvement, regardless of where that takes you, would be the end of the line for Jeff Capel. So, Mike, we're going to start it at the top with Jeff Capel landing his highest ranked recruit at Pitt. And obviously he started his Pitt tenure and came to Pitt as a big time recruiter, and people talking about what he can do recruiting wise. Granted, that maybe was easier at Duke under Coach K, where he's not even the head man, granted doing most of the work recruiting, but it's hard to sell it if you have the grades and you're good enough. And why would you not want to be at Duke if you certainly could get there? It's been a mixed bag at Pitt. Obviously, Justin Champagnie going from a 3-star to what he became and getting himself NBA money. Others maybe not giving fans as much excitement. And then the seasons have been up and down. Even when they've had players, they've either dealt with injuries, drama, etc. And obviously the wins and losses have not been there enough for Jeff Capel. We all know what happened this past season on and off the court, and it was just a season that I'm sure Pitt fans want to forget. Before we get into the full off season, what does getting Dior Johnson mean for Jeff Capel, and how did he pull this off in your estimation?
This is big for Jeff. This is obviously Capel's highest rated recruit. How he got him, relationships, people connected with Dior Johnson with his roots to New York. This was a shocker for everyone. There's no question about it, because this kid just recently decommitted from Oregon within the last week. And then Pitt all of a sudden has a scholarship available. Don't really, some people wondered about, why would they go after another point guard? You don't worry about that. If a 4 or 5-star talent becomes available and he's interested in your program, you find room for him. You don't say, well, we already have a couple guard. No, you take talent and then you deal with it later. This is big for Jeff Capel, because this is not a Jeff Capel thing here. This is big for Pitt, because it's going to give them some positive momentum going into the season. I already see it with the fan base. I see some people already saying, well, Capel, I'm going to give him another shot. Pitt's going to be interesting this year now. It just gives fans hope that they're able to possibly compete with some of the guys with the roster he's put together, and also compete with recruits, because as you mentioned, Mike, that was Jeff Capel's calling card, getting players. He went out and got this guy. This guy was a former top 30 player in the country. He's a player. Is there some things that maybe have to be worked out with him, with his personality? Yeah, but a lot of times that happens with a lot of good players. And that's going to be Jeff. That's part of coaching too, is dealing with personalities and dealing with 18, 19-year-old kids. And Capel will take that every day of the week if he's able to land a guy like Dior Johnson. And this will also help with recruiting for next year. People will see this. This guy has a national following. And when I say that, he has 500,000 Instagram followers. That's the deal with this guy, is he's a national brand. He's created himself. He huge on Twitter. People know, kids know about him, recruits know about him. This will no doubt open some kids' eyes up when looking at Pitt, just because of this player being on their roster.
Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti here, mic'd up here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Pittsburgh Sports Now, talking Jeff Capel, talking recruiting, talking Pitt basketball, landing the highest ranked recruit in the Jeff Capel era and ranked exactly 37 overall, according to 24/7 Sports, the number 7 point guard. You did mention they already had point guards in the fold. Nelly Cummings, in particular, relatively a hometown kid here, coming in after being at Colgate and doing it there, and obviously from Lincoln Park and the success he's had there. So you add excitement with a local flavor and a kid that maybe now has got to this Pitt level and wanting to be a part of the ascension of Pitt and get them back in a tournament and kind of show them the way, because he's been there and done that before himself. And then you get a national brand, as you mentioned, Mike. And I think, to really put it bluntly, Dior Johnson is cool. That's what it is. He's cool to people his age and his generation, and maybe even people a little bit older. And what it's going to do twofold is get more eyeballs on Pitt, regardless of television and what network they're on and when they're going to be on, because again, Pitt is coming off of not the greatest of seasons recently, but he's going to help get it back in national attention, get it back into becoming a national brand. And it's a big deal when you're dealing with an ACC conference with a lot of national brands there. So if you have a player that's a national brand, that can certainly help you become a national brand. You did mention, though, already having a point guard, just wanting to get solid, great players, and that makes tons of sense. How, and this is obviously very, very early, because there's a surprise factor of even landing this recruit, and this is now less than 24 hours later as we're recording this. But any thoughts on how he fits in and how this works? Because obviously some promises were made to others and conversations were made to others, Nelly Cummings that I mentioned, obviously of tons of playing time. You working this with two of them on the court at the same time. Obviously, Dior Johnson's going to have to get PT. Any thoughts on how this works?
That's the number one question that I've seen on Twitter and other places. People want to know how is all this going to work when you have him. You got the transfer guard Greg Elliott from Marquette, another guard.
Right.
You have Jamarius Burton. You got a lot of pieces, and that's, I guess that's why Jeff Capel makes the big money. He's going to have to figure this out. I don't think it's. I would find it hard to believe whether it's. I know people could say what coaches could say what they want as far as they have to earn playing time and stuff like that, and I get I get all that.
Yeah,
but. I would find it. I would be very shocked that if maybe not the first game of the season, but once you get into a couple games into the season, if this guy isn't in your starting lineup, it's not as though you're dealing with a team that had an embarrassment of riches of talent last year. So you're going to find a way to get him on there. As far as him and Cummings together, Nelly Cummings is going to start. He's going to start. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that both these guys, I would go with, and I talked to some people, I would go with the Villanova model as far as multiple guards, multiple point guards, and going with a small lineup.
I was going to say, then you have a small lineup, which the only concern there is, and what Pitt fans have talked about the last couple of years, is needing maybe multiple bigs or rebounding being a thing. Because even during the Justin Champagnie ascension, he wasn't exactly your traditional big, but he was getting boards. And we see that's not going to happen for him in the NBA. Nobody else was, unless he gave you double-doubles. There was just no rebounds. And teams that struggle in college basketball usually do struggle rebounding, even if you have solid guard play.
He'll find a way. There's a lot of minutes out there.
Right.
I was doing this last night. I was looking over the roster, and it's really a good roster. I'm not saying it's ACC championship roster.
Yeah,
but
we were going to get there too.
When you look at what he and his coaching staff were able to do, as far as that's a hard. People think that's the easy thing to do. Get rid of 8 or have 8 open scholarships and then try to fill that up. That's not easy, especially when you're Pitt and you're trying to recruit kids to come to Pitt when you're not playing well. It's not as though you're trying to say, hey, come to Villanova or Gonzaga. And kids will be running there. That isn't the case. And I thought I think what he was able to do, especially in their backcourt, I would see, if we're talking about a starting lineup right now and how he's going to get these guys together, I would say we're looking at Cummings, we're looking at Johnson, we're looking at Jamarius Burton, we're obviously looking at Hugley. And then the last spot is, I think it's going to be a lot with maybe who they play with matchups, but it could be a guy like Blake Hinson. He was another transfer that played big time basketball at Ole Miss. He's 6'8". He's a guy that could give you some length down below. Or you could do Nike Sabandi. I would probably have Sabandi be the first guy coming off the bench, and he could spell either Johnson or Cummings or Burton. I think he's kind of a swing guy. And I think that'd be a pretty good luxury for Pitt if you're able to have somebody like Sabandi not starting and having the luxury of him coming off the bench being the first guy. And then you have, all the other guys, the Diaz Graham twins.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of options for Jeff Capel this year. And it's an interesting roster. And last year they had a roster that I don't know that he felt comfortable giving some guys some minutes. And that's why he played his top 6 or 7 guys so heavy minutes. And he didn't really dip into guys 8 through 13 on the roster. I could see this roster right here, him regularly going 10 or 11 deep with the amount of options he has on this roster, which I think is a good thing. I don't think he's going to be afraid to use players this year, because I think he actually has guys on his bench that can actually help him instead of just filling time.
What's a great thing for a coach at any level? Options. Yeah. You want to have options. You want to have options. And really, it's a good problem to have. And I really think, and we did past shows on this, even as recent as 3 months ago, certainly coming off of the season that Pitt just had, if anybody would have told you that, number one, Pitt would have all these options and Jeff Capel would have multiple really starting point guards, and you'd have a prototypical point guard in Nelly Cummings. You have maybe a more of a modern day point guard now in Dior Johnson. It's positioned as basketball possibly, which is a modern style maybe that Pitt's going into that also could be very attractive to future recruits to hear this being positioned as basketball. That might be more of it. Nobody would have believed you months ago because, as you mentioned, 8 opening scholarships he had to fill here. And yeah, it includes transfers, but that's the way of the world. A lot of work Jeff Capel had to do. And again, tons of pressure on him, and we'll get to that in a moment too. You got to turn this into some wins and losses in the positive direction, or this is going to be really bad for Capel. But he's done his work recruiting, which is what he had to do. And the other end of it is Nike Sabandi wasn't around last year. 2 years ago, if anybody can remember, he was really emerging as maybe the force that could lead Pitt into the next generation and be that bridge star player after Champagny. Obviously, he wasn't there last year. To think that he would then be coming off the bench after him not being there last year was such a death nail, really, and the Horton mess. That's amazing, too. That's really amazing, too, because you figured that him not being there last year and then maybe at least you get him this year in this important season for Capel. But now you maybe don't need him as much, even though obviously he's going to be a key cog and you do need him. You don't need him as much to start and get big minutes because of the work that Jeff Capel did in the offseason.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to be I don't know that the minutes I don't know that starting is going to matter.
Right. That's fair.
I think it's going to be who is producing for him. And I think the big thing is at the end of the game, I think you're going to see a stat sheet of as far as the 40 minutes go. I think you're going to have a lot of guys with high minutes. So it may not matter when you get those minutes as far as the beginning or whatever, but in crunch time, obviously he'll have his best players, but I think he's going to have the option of just spelling guys in and out. And as far as, people, I know a lot of eyes are going to be on the twins from Spain, the Diaz Graham guys. I think this is going to give him also the luxury of letting those guys develop and before he has to throw them into action. Very tremendous job for Pitt. I'm very shocked at what he was able to do with this roster. It's going to be a competitive roster. and one that I would be shocked that Pitt doesn't have a winning record this year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just think that there's enough veteran talent that, if you're talking about just bringing in a bunch of young guys, then those guys have to learn how to play real college basketball. A majority of these guys that are coming in here,
right,
have their transfers,
and even tournament. I mean, Nelly Cummings has literally played in the NCAA tournament. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys have been around college basketball before in one way or the other. A guy that we haven't even brought up yet is another former 4-star shooting guard, Cassius McNeely. He's been considered one of the best three-point shooters coming out of high school, a former 4-star recruit, big kid, 6'4", 6'5" guard. He's a guy we even talked about. He's another shooting guard that I didn't even bring up as far as an option, as far as in the backcourt goes. So that's what I'm talking about, the depth. That guy shows, if that guy shows the coaching staff that he has it going, he's going to force his way into playing time. And that just got me to think of something. The biggest, aside from the veteran depth that this coaching staff was able to do this year, bring in, the biggest thing that they corrected from last season, as far as what I could see, this team was a miserable for the last 2 to 3 years, 3-point shooting team.
Yep.
They got guys now, at least on paper. We'll see what they do here. They brought in a handful of guys now that can shoot it from the outside. And
you're going to have guys get hot in games, and that's what you mentioned about tweaking the lineup. You're going to have guys that maybe coming off the bench are going to get hot in games, or maybe the bench and starting doesn't matter as much. But yeah, having 3-point shooting is a big deal, and Pitt has not had that for several years now, right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest beneficiary of that is going to be Hugley. Teams aren't going to be able to collapse on him as much. He's obviously still going to get a lot of attention. But when you have a couple guys on the outside that are able to be a threat 3-point shooting wise, defenses are going to have to respect that, and they're going to have to play them out there, and that's going to free things up for Hugley down low a little bit.
Exactly. You can't just go to the paint and crash the paint.
Yeah.
You do have it's simple stuff, really. You have a big and you have shooters around them.
Right.
It's exactly what you want when you have a player like Hugley. Again, Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti here, as we're talking Pitt basketball. We're talking Jeff Capel's work that he's been doing this offseason and improving this team, to say the very least. You did mention you expect them to at least have a winning record. You'd be shocked if they don't. I was going to get there in a moment here. We will end with that. But I also do want to mention and do want to ask you this, because we talked about this on past shows. I know Jordan Michalowski touched on this as well. Hugley being there, how much of a factor is that in landing these other players? Now, some of them maybe would come anyway. I know Cummings talked about wanting to do this at Pitt as he ends his college career, etc. Dior Johnson, a bit of a surprise, but a national brand. Obviously, Jeff Capel had to sell him regardless of who's on this team. He knows the record last year and the year before. And I'm not saying Hugley by himself is all of a sudden going to become player of the year in college basketball, but that is a star type player that can be your driving force, that you mentioned exactly what it can do for those shooters, of seeing a big underneath who can dominate the paint. Maybe that'll be the rebounder and get shooters around him. That opens up space for them. Maybe they're going to have defenders who are going to be dealing with Hugley, so they're not going to be double teamed that often. You're going to have multiple guys in terms of spacing. What has Hugley done by himself, maybe to help Jeff Capel in this offseason of recruiting to try to quickly turn this around? And if Hugley was not there, would this be a little bit lesser of a class that Jeff Capel's been able to pull off this offseason? Is there a Hugley factor?
Oh, there's no question about it. He's the face. Dior Johnson might be a national brand, and all.
Right.
You mentioned all these other guys, Cummings and Sabandi, and whoever else you want to mention, Burton. Pitt basketball is John Hugley next season. When they have the opens for the basketball games, and when the announcers come on at the beginning of the game,
He'll face will be on the program, the first one, I'd imagine.
He's the first guy they're going to mention. He has turned himself into a Pitt guy as far as his what he was able to do, overcoming some off the court obstacles, turning things around for himself. and just buying into the Pitt program as far as endorsing it to recruits, endorsing it to the players, endorsing it to the country as far as his belief and dedication to Pitt and Jeff Capel in particular. Bunch of the guys when we talk to these guys about arriving at Pitt, 3/4 of them have all mentioned or more somewhere in our conversation with these guys their anticipation of wanting to play with Hugley. He's a player. People realize that, and he's going to help those guys. And one thing I want to mention, because it's obviously the topic around the country, not just with Pitt, but the NLI.
Yeah.
That people wonder when is Pitt's
for the NIL,
NIL.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
Say it 3 times fast.
When was that going to step up? Or are they going to be able to do that? Trust me, I don't have any details, but I would tell you that that played a factor, I believe, in both Hugley and Dior Johnson.
I would imagine for Dior Johnson.
I don't know.
His Instagram alone could get money, honestly, when you talk about influencers.
500,000. That's ridiculous.
Right. So there's going to be I would imagine there's going to be endorsers just off the IG account, and then obviously he's going to need some kickback. So there has to be an NIL.
Yeah. So Pitt, I doubt that it's Jordan Addison money out of USC. But people at Pitt or people in their team there stepped up in some way. There's no question about it, in order to possibly keep Hugley here at Pitt. And also, I would have to. This is just me speculating here, but I'm confident. I don't say things unless I'm pretty confident in them. I would have to believe that in some fashion, those people stepped up in order to be able to close the deal with Dior Johnson in less than a week. The guy just announced he was decommitting, and then less than a week he commits to Pitt. So somebody over at Pitt stepped up.
100%. It's a team
coming off, and that's a good thing. And then
right.
This is not a knock. That's today's college basketball. That's basketball, or not basketball. That's college athletics in 2022. If you want to be relevant, if you want to play the game, and be a factor as much as you can be, you have to play that game now. And I think both all programs realize this now, but in particular, the Pitt football and Pitt basketball programs realize that, and I'm guessing that played a factor in. I'm just going to name those two as far as them being in Pitt uniforms next season.
And we've had past conversations, so has everybody really in this day and age, about the impact of the NIL, and Pitt football maybe saw that. Their best season in 50 years, and then you lose a Blitnikoff winner in Jordan Addison. Clearly about money, clearly about NIL. So it does go to show, because there was a conversation after that happened about both Pitt football and Pitt basketball, and really Pitt athletics in general, that even when you have great seasons, and even if you have great people there, and say you have a great recruiter, that you only can do so much, because if you have a national brand kid, he's going to want to be in Los Angeles. He's going to want to be in Miami. There's more money there, better NIL deals, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now this is an example of a kid with 500,000 Instagram followers. He doesn't have any connection to Pitt in terms of a family member going here. There's no emotional heartstrings being pulled here, like say a Nelly Cummings, in terms of a local connection. He's a national brand. He could have went to other places. He had commitments other places. Pitt's not coming off of anything special on the court, and Jeff Capel's job is in jeopardy. I mean, that's a factor too when you think about coming to Pitt, because we talked about that. That's harder for Jeff Capel to sell. I think I can do it. There's pressure though this year. We haven't been good, and hey, if we don't get it done, I'm likely gone. That could give a lot of concern and pause to some kids to want to come over for that risk. And yet he decided, no, I'm going to come. And likely, obviously, money is part of that. And then an NIL deal was part of that. So that does show that the boosters, whoever had to do this, stepped up, and that Pitt in Pittsburgh can compete nationally with a national recruit. Again, the highest recruit Jeff Capel got. Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti, we got to end it this way. As we've been talking about Pitt landing Dior Johnson, Jeff Capel's highest ranked recruit at Pitt, and what it has now done for Pitt basketball this coming season. A very important pressure cooker for Jeff Capel. Obviously, what it means to the roster, the lineups, etc., and others who are there. You kind of alluded to this earlier. What are your expectations for this team this coming season? You mentioned a winning record. Obviously, a tournament would be pie in the sky, maybe, but maybe NIT could be a possibility. I mean, something of postseason basketball certainly be a bright spot after the last couple of years. What are your expectations realistically? And what needs to happen for Jeff Capel to be there in the future based on the kids that are now there? This is not cupboard bare like last year with Horton and Sabandi and others not able to play for different reasons. And people said, okay, you can't lose to Colgate. That's embarrassing. But we knew it wasn't going to be a great season. There are horses there now, and people actually are going as far as predicting this team could compete for some type of postseason action. What does Pitt need to do, and what is Pitt going to do now? Early predictions, obviously, with this roster.
I think, we're going to see what their I can't imagine they're going to beef up their non-conference schedule too much, but I think this is going to be Jeff Capel's first winning season at Pitt. I think they should have a better than 500 record in the ACC. I think they'll compete for postseason play. What that is, I don't know, but they just have to stay in. The key guys have to stay injury free. Obviously, Hugley guys have to stay out of. Have to be on the court. But as we talked about, I think they have some depth that will be able to, if they lose somebody, I think they're prepared with, having a roster that's 11 deep that can probably play this season. I think it's going to be a fun year at Pitt, and you have a winning record. I don't think Jeff Capel's good. The only way Jeff Capel isn't back next season is if they have a losing record. If they have a losing,
especially
record,
with what he did in the players that are there now, you got to at least get a winning record. With
if they have a losing record with this roster, not that this roster is Duke like or Gonzaga like.
Sure.
I want to caution fans with that too. When I'm talking about their roster and my excitement for it, it's still not there yet. It's a good roster, but it's a roster you don't want every year to be having to rely on bringing in transfers every year. That's not the. Even
in this climate, that's very risky for a program like Pitt. And I guess the better thing to say is this roster is light years from where it was last year, but still many light years to go to be able to say you built and you now brought this program back to glory and Jeff Capel's accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. It's really factual to say this offseason and this roster was needed to happen now, as hard as it was. People are surprised he could pull this off, but he kind of had to not make this a 3 or 4 year rebuild and have him not be there. But yeah, this roster is not going to go ahead and go to the Final Four. But if this ends up as a winning record and gets in the NIT with this roster and this recruiting, that is a significant jump from a season ago. And we have seen teams, though, look at Baylor, and I'm not saying it's that roster as well. We have seen teams go from out of the tournament to a national championship like Baylor or other program. I'm not saying Pitt's going to do that, but if ever you're going to make a big jump, this is how you do it in an offseason, and this is the type of roster that could get you there. There's reason for some excitement.
Yeah, this roster is a big improvement from where it's been the last season, and I think it's going to get better in the future. He already has a 4-star commitment from Cleveland. And they're expecting on Wednesday, Wednesday the 15th, tomorrow, it's likely they're going to be getting another commitment from a 4-star guard from shooting guard from the Maryland area, who's a tremendous shooter and a volume scorer. The guy can, I was watching his film, love his game, and he's going to be a addition for Pitt. So things are looking on the upswing, and he's able to get these guys, and he's not going to have to look so much in the transfer portal, and that's going to be something I think the fan base will like, because I don't think they like hearing guys transfer out of the program year after year. They want some stability, and winning does that. When you lose, people leave, coaches get rid of players. So hopefully we'll see what happens this year, but I think things, for the first time in a while, legitimately, things are slightly, I don't want to go overboard here, but things are slightly trending upward for the Pitt basketball program and Jeff Capel.
Yeah. And I have seen some predictions of grandeur, I'll call them too. So we have to keep it sane. And you also got to keep those expectations and comments sane, because if you get too wild, that's going to make it even tougher in terms of the look for Jeff Capel as well. But he needed to do work this offseason. He did work this offseason. By far, Jeff Capel's best offseason, most important offseason. Maybe he could have his best season in terms of winning record. All of those things have to happen. I think a reasonable bar of a winning record is very, very fair to say, because, and again, maybe a winning record in conference play that hasn't happened. That'd be very fair to say. NIT would be nice, but a winning record certainly would mean something. And you did mention it's not just about this year. There are tea leaves for next year, the year after that. And if the winning record's there, Jeff Capel will be around. If a winning record's not there, who knows about the future of the program. So it's still very, very important they put this together on the court. And as we did talk about, there's now extra work to be done as well in terms of how you figure this out and how you appease the lineup, how you make a lineup that can actually work for you and can win. And maybe you have some egos to appease here. Obviously, Dior Johnson's not coming in to not get minutes and to be off the bench, even if that doesn't matter. So you got to figure things out.
Well, one other thing about the future, you brought that up, and it got me thinking. It's very important for Pitt to.
I like to engage your mind.
It's tough to do with my mind, but
I don't know if I want to get in there and know what's happening.
It's very important that Pitt shows something in the future in terms of being a program that can win, because the WPIL, we're usually talking about this with football, not so much with basketball, but over the next 2 years, not this coming year, the following year, the WPIL is putting out some major talent, as far as that national talent, not just guys that want to, go to stick around here. Teams around the country, there's 4 guys that already have Pitt offers from the WPIL that are sophomores now and freshmen. Pitt has to show the ability to win if they're going to want to try to keep those kids home.
Getting Dior Johnson's big though, because that shows a lot to those kids.
Yeah, but that'll help. But kids want to win.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And if Pitt, if there's a little bit of excitement, the zoo starts buzzing, Pitt basketball becomes a thing. It's not going to become what it was, with Dixon that soon. But if there's a little bit of a buzz and he's able to keep a couple of these local players home, that's something to keep an eye on in the future, because I know they're recruiting them. They have offers, they have offers from a lot of other teams too. So Pitt needs to win in order to have any shot at keeping those guys home.
Yeah, and maybe another difference to football with the WPIL, it's not every year that you're going to have national recruits coming out in this area basketball-wise. So it would be big for Pitt to be able to land 1 or 2 of them, and it does impact this program for the future. It all is dependent on what happens this season. You can't really undercut it, Mike. I mean, this season is maybe the most important season of Jeff Capel's life, of his career, and certainly of Pitt basketball in a very, very long time. We could talk about this all day. There's a lot more that's going to be out there to discuss. So some positive news we were able to talk about in terms of Pitt basketball and Jeff Capel. That's a plus for these kids to hear this and have that get out there as well. And Dior Johnson, the highest ranked recruit under Jeff Capel, is now a member of the Pitt Panthers, and factoring in with a lineup that includes Nelly Cummings and company, and of course Mikey Sabandi, Hugley, etc., that are still in the fold. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Hit that subscribe button, comment below, and also find us on social media and at Pittsburgh Sports Now.